The Broken Princess. The alien king's crystalline throne room shimmered with iridescent light, a dizzying mix of organic curves and sharp geometric angles. Ethan Drake, a human mercenary with a battered combat suit and sharp eyes, stood before the Zyran monarch. His weathered face betrayed no emotion as he waited for the payment he had fought tooth and nail for over the last 6 grueling months. King Varrox lounged on his throne, his iridescent skin glowing faintly under the pulsating lights. His smile was sharp, his contempt for the human standing before him barely concealed. "Your payment, human," the king said, his voice dripping with mockery. Ethan's jaw tightened. He had endured countless skirmishes and near-death encounters to bring peace to this alien kingdom. All he wanted was the 60,000 credits promised to him. "I did my part. I assume you'll do yours," Ethan said, his hand twitching near his plasma pistol. King Varrox's sharp smile widened. "Oh, you'll get what's due to you." He raised a hand, and a figure emerged from the shadows. Ethan's breath caught for a moment. The woman, no, the girl, had translucent lavender skin that glowed faintly in the light. Her long, wavy, silvery hair framed her striking violet eyes, which radiated defiance and pain. She sat in a hover chair, her legs thin and motionless. "This," King Varrox announced with mock grandeur, "is Princess Lyrian, my daughter. Defective from birth, the disgrace to my bloodline. She will be your payment, human. Take her and leave my sight." "What?" Ethan said, his voice flat with disbelief. Lyrian's fists clenched, her eyes blazing with anger. "You can't just." "I can," Varrox interrupted coldly, glaring at his daughter. "You're a burden to this kingdom, and this human has no place to negotiate. Take her, mercenary, or leave with nothing." Ethan's stomach churned. He wanted to storm out of the palace, leave the king and his twisted sense of justice behind, but as his eyes met Lyrian's, he saw something more, a spark of strength and resilience that her father refused to acknowledge. "Fine," Ethan said at last, his voice steady. "I'll take her. But don't think for a second I'm doing this because of you." Varrox's cruel laughter echoed through the throne room. "Enjoy your prize, human." As the guards escorted them out, Lyrian's silence was deafening. Ethan pushed her hover chair through the crowded corridors of the spaceport. The hum of alien engines and distant chatter filled the air. But all Ethan could focus on was the tension radiating from the woman in front of him. "I can handle this myself," Lyrian snapped, taking control of her chair. Ethan raised his hands in mock surrender. "By all means, princess." She turned to glare at him, her violet eyes narrowing. "Don't call me that." "What should I call you then?" "Just Lyrian," she said, her voice softening slightly. "Not that it matters. I'm just cargo now, aren't I?" Ethan sighed, running a hand through his short brown hair. "Look, I'm not thrilled about this arrangement either, but you're not cargo. As long as you're on my ship, you're part of the crew. That's the deal." Lyrian frowned, her defiance winning for a moment. "You don't have to pretend to care." "I'm not pretending," Ethan replied, his tone firm. "And if you're going to survive out here, you're going to need to stop thinking of yourself as broken. Everyone's got something holding them back. The trick is to fight anyway." Lyrian's expression was unreadable as they approached the Iron Resolve, a battle-worn ship scarred from countless missions. Its hull bore the marks of plasma blasts and meteor impacts, but its engines still hummed with determination. "This is yours?" Lyrian asked, her voice laced with skepticism. "Yep," Ethan replied, entering the access code. The ramp descended with a hiss, revealing the cramped but meticulously maintained interior. "Welcome to the Iron Resolve. It's not a palace, but it'll keep us alive." As Lyrian maneuvered her chair up the ramp, she surveyed the ship's modest living quarters, narrow corridors, and cluttered control panels. "Cozy," she said, her tone neutral. Ethan chuckled. "That's one word for it." He showed her to a small cabin with a narrow bed, a storage unit, and a compact hygiene station. "This is your room," he said. "It's not much, but it's yours." Lyrian studied the space, her face carefully blank. "It's fine." Ethan lingered in the doorway, unsure of what to say. "If you need anything, just ask. I'll be in the engine room, fixing what your father's rebellion broke." As he walked away, Lyrian stared at the empty doorway, her hands gripping the armrests of her chair. For the first time in years, she felt something other than anger and despair. She felt the faintest glimmer of hope. Uncharted territory. The iron resolve lifted off from Zyron's atmosphere with a rumble, its engines straining against the pull of gravity. Ethan sat in the pilot's seat, his focus split between the flickering control panels and the swirling expanse of stars beyond the viewport. The ship's AI chimed softly. "All systems operational, Captain. Primary route calculated." "Good," Ethan muttered. He glanced at the navigation display, ensuring they were set on a course to the nearby neutral trading station, where he hoped to figure out his next move. The cabin door behind him slid open with a faint hiss. Lyrian's hover chair entered the bridge, her sharp eyes scanning the control panels. Her lavender skin seemed to catch the light, glowing faintly in the dim cockpit. "This doesn't look like much," she said, her tone edged with skepticism. Ethan leaned back in his seat, smirking. "It's not supposed to. The iron resolve doesn't win beauty contests, but she's kept me alive in places your royal palaces wouldn't last 5 minutes." Lyrian raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. Her eyes lingered on the star map displayed on the central console. "Where are we going?" "To a neutral trade station," Ethan replied. "Need to restock supplies, fix the damage your father's rebellion left on my ship, and figure out what to do next." Lyrian's gaze hardened at the mention of her father. "He doesn't care about anything or anyone but himself. I was just another problem for him to get rid of." Ethan turned his chair to face her, his expression serious. "Then prove him wrong." She blinked, startled. "What?" "You heard me," Ethan said, crossing his arms. "You're not on Zyron anymore. Out here, no one cares who your father is or what he thinks of you. The only thing that matters is what you do now. So, what's it going to be?" Lyrian looked away, her hands gripping the armrests of her hover chair. "I don't even know where to start," she admitted softly. "Start by learning," Ethan said, gesturing to the ship around them. "The iron resolve isn't just my home, it's my lifeline. If you're going to be on board, you'll need to pull your weight. Can you do that?" Her violet eyes met his, a spark of determination flickering in their depths. "Yes." Ethan nodded. "Good. Then let's start with the basics. Ever handled a ship's systems before?" Lyrian hesitated before shaking her head. "No, but I've studied them. I've read about starship operations and navigation." "Reading's a start," Ethan said, motioning for her to come closer. "Let's put it into practice. This is the primary control console. It manages navigation, communications, and sensors. Show me what you know." For the next hour, Ethan guided her through the ship's systems, his voice patient but firm. Lyrian absorbed everything quickly, her sharp mind surprising him at every turn. Despite her lack of practical experience, her knowledge of starship mechanics was impressive. "You're a fast learner," Ethan admitted, leaning back in his chair. "I had a lot of time to read," Lyrian replied, her tone dry. "Not much else to do when your father keeps you locked away in a palace." Ethan frowned. "You've never been outside the palace before." She shook her head. "Never. This is the first time I've seen the stars up close." Ethan studied her for a moment, his usual sarcasm giving way to something softer. "Well, welcome to the galaxy, Princess. It's not all bad out here." Lyrian's lips twitched in the faintest hint of a smile. "We'll see." Suddenly, the ship shuddered violently, throwing both of them against their seats. The warning lights on the console flared to life, and the AI's calm voice announced, "Critical malfunction detected in the primary engine core." Ethan cursed, his hands flying across the controls. "What now?" The AI continued, "Power fluctuations detected. Engine failure imminent. Lyrian's eyes widened. What's happening? The ship's barely holding together, Ethan muttered. I didn't have enough credits to fix everything before we left. Hang on. The iron resolve shook again, the viewport flickering as the ship's systems struggled to maintain stability. Ethan's jaw clenched as he rerouted power to stabilize the engines. Is there anything I can do? Lyrian asked, her voice steady despite the panic in her eyes. Ethan glanced at her, impressed by her composure. Yes. See that console. Monitor the power output and let me know if it spikes again. She nodded, wheeling herself over to the secondary console and quickly analyzing the readouts. Power levels are fluctuating, but they're stabilizing for now. Good, Ethan said, his hands working the controls. Keep an eye on it. If this thing blows, we're dead in the water. Minutes passed like hours as the ship groaned under the strain. Finally, the warning lights dimmed, and the AI announced, engine core stabilized. All systems operational. Ethan exhaled sharply, leaning back in his seat. That was too close. Lyrian turned to him, her expression serious. What caused it? Old parts, Ethan replied. I've been patching this ship together with whatever scraps I can find. We'll need to make some serious repairs at the station, or we won't survive the next jump. Lyrian hesitated before speaking. I can help. Ethan raised an eyebrow. You know anything about engines? No, she admitted. But I can learn. You said everyone has to pull their weight, right? Ethan smiled faintly. You're full of surprises, princess. All right, let's see what you've got. As the iron resolve sailed through the stars, Ethan realized that Lyrian wasn't the burden her father had claimed she was. If anything, she was quickly proving herself to be a valuable ally. A test of trust. The iron resolve glided through the endless expanse of space, its engines humming steadily after the near-catastrophic malfunction. The temporary calm was a stark contrast to the tension in the air as Ethan guided Lyrian to the engine room for the next challenge in her unplanned apprenticeship. Rule number 1, Ethan began, leaning against the bulkhead as the doors hissed open. Don't touch anything unless you're sure you won't blow us up. Lyrian rolled her eyes. Is everything you say this dramatic? Ethan smirked. Only when I'm trying to scare the rookies. He motioned toward the engine core, a web of pipes, wires, and glowing conduits. This is the heart of the ship. Keep it running. And we stay alive. Lyrian's gaze lingered on the core, her violet eyes narrowing in indetermination. What's wrong with it? Plenty, Ethan said, gesturing at a flickering display screen. Power relays are shot, coolant systems are barely functional, and the stabilizers might as well be held together with duct tape. We're lucky it hasn't melted down already. Lyrian maneuvered her hover chair closer, studying the tangled mess. Why didn't you fix it before? Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. Didn't have the credits. Jobs like yours don't exactly pay well. No offense. None taken, Lyrian replied dryly. How can I help? Ethan arched an eyebrow. You're serious. I am, she said firmly. If I'm part of the crew, then I need to do my part. Show me what to do. Ethan hesitated for a moment, then nodded. All right, let's start simple. See that panel over there? Open it up. Lyrian moved to the indicated panel and pried it open, revealing a chaotic tangle of wires. She glanced back at Ethan. Now what? Those red wires are part of the power relay system, Ethan explained, kneeling beside her. They're overheating because the connections are corroded. You'll need to clean them and reseal the connectors. Lyrian picked up a nearby toolkit, her hand steady despite her inexperience. You're trusting me with this? Ethan shrugged. Gotta start somewhere. Besides, if you mess up, I'll know before the ship explodes. Reassuring, she muttered, carefully untangling the wires. As she worked, Ethan watched her closely, noting the precision in her movements. Despite her lack of training, she approached the task with a mix of focus and determination that reminded him of his early days as a mechanic. Minutes passed in silence, broken only by the occasional hum of the ship's systems. Finally, Lyrian sat back, wiping her hands on a cloth. Done. Now what? Ethan inspected her work, nodding in approval. Not bad, Princess. You might just have a knack for this. Lyrian smirked. Told you not to call me that. Force of habit, Ethan said with a grin. He closed the panel and stood, stretching. That's enough for now. Let's get some food before you burn yourself out. In the small galley, Ethan prepared 2 plates of nutrient-rich rations. The smell wasn't exactly appetizing, but it was better than nothing. Lyrian took a bite, her face crunching in mild disgust. This is what you eat. Ethan chuckled. Welcome to life outside the palace. It's not glamorous, but it keeps you alive. Lyrian shook her head but kept eating. As the silence stretched, she glanced at him. Why do you do this? Do what? Ethan asked, raising an eyebrow. Risk your life for jobs that barely pay, she said. You could have walked away back there, left me behind. Ethan leaned back, his expression thoughtful. I guess I've seen too much of what happens when people don't step up. Out here, survival isn't just about yourself. It's about the people you're with, even if they're strangers. Lyrian studied him for a moment, her expression softening. I never thought a mercenary could have a moral code. Ethan smirked. Don't get used to it. Before Lyrian could respond, the ship jolted violently, throwing them against the table. The emergency lights flared as the A's voice filled the cabin. Warning. Unidentified vessel approaching. Potential threat detected. Ethan jumped to his feet, helping Lyrian steady her hover chair. Stay here, he said sharply. I'll handle this. No, Lyrian said, her voice firm. If I'm part of the crew, I'm part of this too. Ethan hesitated, then nodded. Fine, but stay behind me. They hurried to the cockpit, where the viewport displayed a sleek black starship closing in fast. The design was unmistakable. Zyran military. Ethan's stomach tightened. Your father's men. Maybe, Lyrian said, her voice tense. He wouldn't let me go without a backup plan. Figures, Ethan muttered, gripping the controls. Hold on, Princess. This is about to get rough. As the enemy ship began to fire, the iron resolve darted into evasive maneuvers. Lyrian clung to her armrests, her eyes wide but focused. Ethan barked commands to the ship's AI, pushing the battered vessel to its limits. Can we outrun them? Lyrian asked, her voice strained. Not with the engines in this shape, Ethan replied. We'll have to fight. Fight? In this junk heap, she exclaimed. Hey, Ethan said with a grin, this junk heap has seen worse. The iron resolve twisted and turned, dodging laser blasts as Ethan activated the ship's weapons. Lyrian's heart pounded as the cockpit filled with the sound of blaring alarms and Ethan's rapid-fire commands. For the first time in her life, she felt truly alive. Through fire and fury, the iron resolve rocked violently as another laser blast grazed its hull. The alarm blared in the cockpit, and Ethan's hands flew across the controls, desperately trying to keep the ship steady. Lyrian clutched the armrests of her hover chair, her violet eyes darting between the flashing consoles and the approaching enemy vessel. Shields are down to 40%. The ship's AI announced. Structural integrity at risk. Ethan growled under his breath. We don't have enough power to keep this up. I need options. He glanced at Lyrian, who was frantically scanning the displays. Their weapons are more advanced, she said, her voice trembling but focused. If we can disable their targeting systems, it might buy us time. And how exactly do we do that? Ethan shot back, jerking the controls to avoid another barrage. Lyrian's gaze flicked to the console. The electromagnetic pulse emitter. It's in your weapon system, isn't it? Ethan blinked, surprised. You know about EMPs. I told you, I've read a lot, she said, her hands flying over the secondary control panel. But it won't work unless we get closer. Ethan groaned. Of course not. All right, strap in, princess. We're going in. The Iron Resolve banked sharply, heading straight for the enemy ship. Lyrian's stomach lurched as the view of the massive Zyran vessel filled the cockpit. Ethan's knuckles were white as he gripped the controls, the battered ship shuddering under the strain. Almost there, he muttered, sweat beading on his brow. Lyrian, be ready to fire the EMP on my mark. She nodded, her fingers poised over the controls. I'm ready. The Zyran ship unleashed another volley of laser fire, one of the blasts clipping the Iron Resolve. Sparks flew from the consoles, and the lights flickered, but Ethan kept the ship on course. The distance between the two vessels closed rapidly. Mark, Ethan shouted. Lyrian hit the button, and the Iron Resolve emitted a pulse of crackling energy. The EMP rippled outward, and the enemy ship's lights flickered before going dark. Their weapons' fire ceased abruptly. Direct hit, Lyrian said, her voice filled with a mix of relief and exhilaration. Nice work, princess, Ethan said, a rare grin flashing across his face. But we're not out of the woods yet. They'll recover faster than we will. Then we need to leave, Lyrian said quickly. What's the nearest jump point? Ethan pulled up the star map. There's one nearby, but the engines don't have a choice, Lyrian interrupted. We'll make it. Ethan glanced at her, surprised by her confidence. All right, let's see if the old girl can handle it. The Iron Resolve roared as Ethan pushed the engines to their limit, the jump drive charging with an audible hum. Behind them, the Zyran ship began to flicker back to life, its weapons slowly coming online. They're regaining power, Lyrian called out. I see it, Ethan replied, his voice tight. Hold on. The ship jolted forward as the jump drive activated, the swirling colors of hyperspace filling the viewport. The sudden silence was almost deafening after the chaos of battle. Ethan leaned back in his chair, letting out a shaky breath. We made it, he said, more to himself than anyone else. Lyrian exhaled slowly, her hands unclenching from the armrests. That was intense. Ethan chuckled, his usual sarcasm returning. Welcome to life on the edge, princess. She shot him a look but couldn't help the small smile that tugged at her lips. I think I might survive it. Ethan's expression softened as he met her gaze. You're doing more than surviving. You just saved our lives back there. For a moment, Lyrian didn't know how to respond. She had spent her entire life being told she was weak, useless. Yet here she was, proving otherwise. What now? She asked finally. Now, Ethan said, standing and stretching. We figure out what's next. But first, let's see how much damage we took. The two of them made their way through the ship, inspecting the aftermath of the battle. The Iron Resolve had seen better days, with scorch marks on the walls, and several systems in dire need of repair. But it was still flying, and that was enough for now. As they worked, Lyrian found herself glancing at Ethan more often than she intended. His unwavering confidence and resourcefulness were unlike anything she had seen before. He wasn't just a mercenary. He was a survivor, someone who thrived in the face of impossible odds. For the first time in her life, she felt like she belonged. Into the unknown. The Iron Resolve floated through hyperspace, the quiet hum of the engines a stark contrast to the chaos they had just escaped. Ethan stood at the main console in the engine room, inspecting the scorched panel with a furrowed brow. Lyrian sat nearby, tools spread out on a small workbench she had claimed as her own. Can we fix it? She asked, watching Ethan's expression carefully. He shrugged, his voice grim. Fix is a strong word. Patch, maybe. The EMP worked, but it overloaded half the secondary systems. We're lucky the jump drive didn't fry completely. Lyrian nodded, her hands automatically reaching for the toolkit. What do you need me to do? Ethan glanced at her, surprised yet again by her willingness to dive in. You're eager for someone who's never been outside a palace. I spent my whole life being told what I couldn't do, she said, her tone sharp. I'm done with that. Now, are we fixing this ship or not? A smirk tugged at Ethan's lips. All right, princess. Let's see if you've got the hands to match that fire. He handed her a plasma cutter and pointed to a damaged conduit. Careful with this. It's still carrying residual energy, so no sudden movements. Lyrian carefully maneuvered her hover chair closer and began working on the conduit, her focus razor-sharp. Ethan couldn't help but watch her out of the corner of his eye. Despite her inexperience, she was a quick study, and her determination was something he couldn't ignore. "You're not half bad at this," he said after a while, his tone teasing. Lyrian gave him a sidelong glance. "Coming from you, I'll take that as high praise." Before Ethan could respond, the ship's AI chimed in. "Captain, incoming distress signal detected." Ethan straightened, his attention snapping to the intercom. "Source: unknown," the AI replied. "Signal is weak but persistent. Coordinates are within reachable distance." Lyrian set down the plasma cutter. "A distress signal. Should we check it out?" Ethan hesitated. The iron resolve wasn't in the best shape, and diverting course could lead to more trouble than it was worth. But his instincts told him otherwise. "Could be a trap," he said, half to himself. "Or it could be someone who needs help," Lyrian countered. "Isn't that what you do? Help people?" Ethan frowned. "I'm not a hero, princess. I'm a mercenary." "Funny," Lyrian said, crossing her arms. "You didn't leave me behind when you could have." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You've got a point. All right, let's see what we're dealing with." Adjust course to the signal's coordinates." Course adjusted. Arrival in 20 minutes, the AI confirmed. Ethan turned back to Lyrian. "If this goes south, don't say I didn't warn you." 20 minutes later, the iron resolve emerged from hyperspace near a small derelict freighter drifting aimlessly in the void. The ship's hull was scorched, and its engines were dark. Faint lights flickered in the cockpit, the only sign that it wasn't entirely lifeless. "Scan the ship," Ethan ordered, his fingers flying over the controls. "Scanning," the AI replied. "Minimal life signs detected. Vessel appears heavily damaged. No active weapon systems." "Doesn't mean it's safe," Ethan muttered, eyeing the freighter warily. He glanced at Lyrian. "Stay here. I'll check it out." "No," Lyrian said firmly. "I'm coming with you." "You don't have to prove yourself to me," Ethan said, his tone softening. "This isn't about you," she shot back. "I've spent my whole life running. I'm done with that." Ethan studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right. Suit up. And stay close." The freighter's airlock creaked open with a hiss, revealing a dark, narrow corridor lined with broken panels and exposed wires. Ethan led the way, his plasma pistol drawn, while Lyrian followed in her hover chair, her gaze darting around nervously. "Stay sharp," Ethan said, his voice low. "This place gives me a creeps." The faint sound of a groan reached their ears, and Lyrian froze. "Did you hear that?" Ethan nodded, motioning for her to stay behind him. They moved toward the sound, their footsteps echoing eerily in the empty ship. Finally, they reached the source, a figure slumped against the wall, barely conscious. It was an alien, its skin a deep shade of blue with faint bioluminescent patterns. Its breathing was labored, and its eyes fluttered open as they approached. "Help. Me?" it rasped. Ethan knelt beside the alien, scanning its injuries. "Looks like a survivor. Multiple wounds, but nothing life-threatening." "Why would they be out here alone?" Lyrian asked, frowning. "That's the question," Ethan replied grimly. He glanced at the alien. "What happened to your ship?" The alien coughed weakly. "Ambush. Pirates. Took everything." Lyrian's eyes widened. "Pirates. Do you think they're still nearby?" "Could be," Ethan said, his jaw tightening. "We need to get out of here before they come back." The alien grabbed Ethan's arm with surprising strength. "No. Cargo hold. They left something. Dangerous." "What kind of something?" Ethan asked, But the alien's eyes closed, and its grip slackened. Ethan looked at Lyrian, his expression grim. "I come like this." "Neither do I," she admitted. "But if there's something dangerous on board, we can't just leave it." Ethan sighed. "Fine. Let's check the cargo hold. But if things go sideways, we're out of here." They made their way deeper into the freighter, the atmosphere growing heavier with each step. The cargo hold loomed ahead, its doors slightly ajar. Ethan pushed them open cautiously, revealing a strange container in the center of the room. Its surface pulsed faintly with an ominous red light. "What is that?" Lyrian whispered. "I don't know," Ethan said, stepping closer. "But I've got a bad feeling about it." The container let out a low hum, and the room seemed to vibrate. Whatever was inside wasn't just dangerous. It was alive. The living threat. The low hum emanating from the container grew louder, filling the cargo hold with an unsettling vibration. Ethan's instincts screamed at him to turn back, but curiosity and responsibility kept him rooted in place. Lyrian maneuvered her hover chair closer, her violet eyes fixed on the pulsing red light. "Ethan," she said, her voice a whisper, "whatever this is, it's not just cargo." Ethan nodded grimly. "Yeah, I'm getting that vibe." He circled the container cautiously, his plasma pistol raised. The markings on its surface were unlike anything he'd ever seen. Alien symbols etched with precision, glowing faintly as if alive. "Do you recognize the language?" he asked, glancing at Lyrian. She studied the symbols, her brow furrowing. "It's ancient Siren. My father used to talk about it. This is a containment unit." "For what?" Ethan asked, his voice tense. "I'm not sure," she admitted, "but it was designed to hold something dangerous. If it's here, abandoned, it's because whoever left it didn't want it found." Ethan frowned, his gaze narrowing at the container. "Well, they didn't do a great job. Let's see if we can figure out what's inside before it becomes a bigger problem." "Are you sure that's a good idea?" Lyrian asked, her voice edged with concern. "Not really," Ethan admitted. "But if this thing's dangerous, leaving it here for someone else to stumble upon isn't exactly an option." As he approached the container, a series of rapid beeps echoed through the hold. Ethan froze, his eyes darting to the control panel on the side of the unit. The beeping grew faster, and the red light pulsing from the container intensified. "That doesn't sound good," Lyrian said, gripping the armrests of her hover chair. Ethan examined the control panel, his fingers hovering over the glowing buttons. "Looks like some kind of activation sequence. I can try to stop it, but..." Before he could finish, the container let out a deafening hiss, and the top split open. A blinding red light spilled out, forcing Ethan and Lyrian to shield their eyes. The hum grew into a roar as a shadowy form began to rise from within. When the light dimmed, Ethan lowered his arm, his eyes widening. Standing before them was a creature unlike anything he'd ever seen. It was humanoid but impossibly tall, its elongated limbs shimmering with a translucent, dark red glow. Its eyes burned with an inner fire, and its movements were unnervingly fluid, as though it were made of liquid flame. "Ethan." Lyrian's voice was barely a whisper. The creature tilted its head, its fiery gaze settling on them. When it spoke, its voice was a low, resonant rumble that echoed in their minds rather than their ears. "Who has awakened me?" Ethan took a cautious step back, keeping his pistol trained on the entity. "We're just passing through. Found you by accident." The creature's gaze flicked to Lyrian, its fiery eyes narrowing. A Zyran hair, and a human. Curious. "What are you?" Lyrian asked, her voice steadier than she felt. The creature straightened, its form shimmering like a mirage. "I am Arakthar, the last guardian of the scorching flame. Your ancestors imprisoned me here to protect their kind from my wrath. Tell me, Hair of Zyran, why have you released me?" "We didn't mean to," Lyrian said quickly. "We didn't even know you were here." Arakthar's burning eyes flickered as it seemed to consider her words. Ignorance does not absolve you of responsibility. My power is free now, and with it comes the reckoning your people have long delayed. Ethan stepped in front of Lyrian, his weapon still aimed at the creature. Listen, we didn't wake you up to start a fight. If you want to leave, go. We'll get out of your way. The creature laughed, a sound that made the walls of the cargo hold tremble. You are bold, human, but your kind always has been. It is why I respect you. Ethan didn't lower his weapon. Glad to hear it. So, what now? Arakthar's form flickered, the flames around its body growing more intense. Now I reclaim my freedom. But beware, my release will not go unnoticed. Forces will come for me, and they will not spare you. Great, Ethan muttered. Just what we needed. The creature raised a hand, and the air around it shimmered. As a token of respect, I offer you this warning. Leave this system. My presence will draw enemies beyond your comprehension. If you value your lives, you will flee. Without waiting for a response, Arakthar dissolved into a plume of flame, disappearing through the hull as though it weren't solid. The cargo hold fell silent, save for the faint crackle of scorched metal where the creature had stood. Ethan lowered his pistol, his mind racing. What the hell was that? Lyrian's face was pale, her hands gripping the sides of her chair. Something we were never meant to see. We need to move, Ethan said, grabbing her hover chair and pushing it toward the exit. If what it said is true, we're sitting ducks here. What about the survivor? Lyrian asked. Ethan hesitated but shook his head. No time. We'll send a beacon for rescue, but if we don't leave now, we're dead. As they boarded the Iron Resolve, the ship's sensors lit up with warnings. Multiple vessels were entering the system, their signatures unmistakably hostile. They're here, Lyrian said, her voice tight. Then let's not keep them waiting, Ethan replied, throwing himself into the pilot's seat. The ship roared to life, its engines straining as it powered up for another jump. As the Iron Resolve surged into hyperspace, Ethan glanced at Lyrian. Whatever that thing was, it's just the beginning. Lyrian met his gaze, her violet eyes filled with a mixture of fear and resolve. Then we'll be ready. The Reckoning. The Iron Resolve sped through hyperspace, the stars outside the viewport stretching into streaks of light. Ethan's hands were steady on the controls, but his mind raced with thoughts of the fiery entity they had unleashed. In the co-pilot's seat, Lyrian stared at the console, her fingers tracing the flickering display. Neither of them spoke for several tense moments. Finally, Lyrian broke the silence. Do you think it was telling the truth about the enemies coming for it? Ethan sighed. I've been in this line of work long enough to know when something's not bluffing. Whatever Arakthar is, it wasn't lying. We just put ourselves on the map for something big. The ship's AI chimed in, cutting through the tension. Captain, multiple ships are pursuing our trajectory. Estimated time to intercept, 15 minutes. Lyrian's heart sank. They found us already. Ethan's jaw tightened. They're faster than I expected. Can we outjump them? Negative, the AI replied. The jump drive requires additional time to recharge. Of course it does, Ethan muttered, slamming his hand against the console. All right, prepare for combat. Lyrian, you know how to operate weapons now. You're about to get a crash course in using them for real. Lyrian's eyes widened, but she nodded. Tell me what to do. Ethan motioned to the weapons console. That panel controls the turret systems. Focus on targeting their engines. If we can cripple them, we might have a chance to escape. The ship jolted as it exited hyperspace, dropping into the vast darkness of a desolate star system. Behind them, 3 sleek, black vessels blinked into view, their predatory designs unmistakable. Pirates, Lyrian said, her voice trembling slightly. More like bounty hunters, Ethan corrected grimly. They're not here for us. They're here for Arakthar, and they won't hesitate to kill us to get what they want. The enemy ships wasted no time, opening fire with precision. The Iron Resolve shuddered under the impact, warning lights flashing across the console. Shields down to 30%, the AI announced. Lyrian, now would be a great time to hit something, Ethan shouted, jerking the ship into an evasive roll. Lyrian's hands flew across the controls, the turret systems locking onto the nearest enemy ship. She gritted her teeth and fired, a burst of plasma bolts streaking through the void. The shots hit their mark, striking the enemy's engine and sending it spiraling out of control. "Direct hit," she exclaimed, a surge of adrenaline fueling her focus. "Nice work," Ethan said, his tone tight as he veered the ship to avoid another barrage. "But there are two more. Don't let up." The second enemy ship closed in, unleashing a flurry of laser fire. The iron resolve rocked violently, sparks flying from a nearby panel. Lyrian targeted the attacker, her shots grazing its hull but failing to disable it. "They're too fast," she said, frustration creeping into her voice. Ethan gritted his teeth. "Then we even the odds." AI, deploy countermeasures. Countermeasures deployed, the AI confirmed. Small pods ejected from the iron resolve, releasing clouds of electromagnetic interference that disrupted the enemy's targeting systems. The second ship faltered, its lasers veering off course. Ethan seized the opportunity, spinning the iron resolve around and firing its forward cannons. The blasts tore through the enemy's cockpit, leaving it a smoldering wreck. "One left," Ethan said, sweat dripping down his brow. The final ship was smarter, hanging back and firing from a distance. Its precision strikes hammered the iron resolve, the shields collapsing entirely. "Shields are offline," the AI reported. "Hull integrity critical." Ethan cursed under his breath. "We're not going to survive another hit." Lyrian's eyes darted to the console, a thought sparking in her mind. "What about the EMP? Can we use it again?" Ethan hesitated. "It's risky. If we don't time it perfectly, we'll disable ourselves too." "We don't have a choice," she said firmly. "Do it." Ethan nodded, his hands flying over the controls. "Charging EMP. Hold on to something." The iron resolve turned sharply, bringing the last enemy ship into view. Lyrian watched the targeting display, her heart pounding as the seconds ticked by. The enemy's lasers lit up the void, but Ethan held his course, waiting for the perfect moment. "Now," Lyrian shouted. Ethan hit the trigger, and the EMP pulse rippled outward in a crackling wave. The enemy ship's systems went dark, its weapons falling silent as it drifted helplessly in space. "We did it," Lyrian said, relief flooding her voice. "Barely," Ethan muttered, his gaze scanning the redouts. The iron resolve was barely holding together, its engine sputtering and its hull breached in several places. "But we're not out of the woods yet. AI, find us a safe jump point." "Coordinates identified," the AI replied. "Jump drive online in 60 seconds. "Let's hope that's enough time," Ethan said, his hands gripping the controls tightly. As the ship limped toward the jump point, Lyrian glanced at Ethan. "Why did you do this? Take me, fight for me. You could have left me back on Zyron." Ethan looked at her, his expression softening. "Because I've seen what happens when people don't stand up for each other. You're more than what your father said you were. You just needed someone to give you a chance." Lyrian held his gaze, her heart swelling with gratitude. For the first time in her life, she felt like she mattered, not because of her royal blood, but because of who she was. The ship jolted as it entered hyperspace, leaving the wreckage and the pursuing vessels behind. The iron resolve was battered but alive, much like its crew. For the first time in years, Lyrian felt a sense of hope. "Where to now?" she asked. Ethan smiled faintly. "Wherever we want. Welcome to the real galaxy, Princess. It's messy, dangerous, and a hell of a lot more interesting than a palace." She smiled back, ready to face whatever came next.